This is not an ordinary landing. This is an offset landing test, and the pilot should correct for the offset just before crossing the threshold and land safely. It happened that the pilot elected to go around, and he did it perfectly, very close to the ground, uneventfully. Despite of being an extreme flight test maneuver, it bears some interesting lessons very applicable to airline operations. A go-around was very likely as a result of the planned unstable approach, and so the crew briefed the maneuver in its very details. Task sharing and CRM were discussed, and all crew members performed in a timely manner.
Go-around is a safety procedure with a strong reputation of reducing the aviation accident rates. When timely and properly performed, it can reduce runway overruns and mid-air collisions, and provide evasive escape from bad weather.
However, it has been practiced more frequently in simulator sessions, often with an engine failure and from the minimums, in the absence of a real ATC environment. This is not exactly the case of a real-life go-around, where the aircraft's light weight, the high thrust from the engines, the altitude from which the real procedure is flown, and the ATC interference puts the crew into a situation that is not regularly trained. It can add some workload, enough to surprise and disturb the crew to change their plans during a go-around. Statistically, short-haul pilots should experience one go-around every year. Long-haul pilots will go around just once every 2 or 3 years. But depending on the airline, it may surprisingly reach one go-around every 5 or 10 years. Being such a rare procedure, it is essential that pilots be familiar and confident with all aspects regarding the go-around maneuver. This video will focus on ensuring the maneuver is flown safely and effectively, while making crews aware of the difficulties that can occur.
Because the go-around is not a frequent occurrence, being prepared to abandon the approach is a key player in conducting a safe maneuver.
Being prepared means knowledge of briefings, call-outs, sequence of actions, and task sharing. After the decision to abandon the approach is taken, fly the published SOP procedure. Programming the approach into the FMS is part of the landing operation. This includes the go-around as well. The go-around is normally briefed during the descent preparation and should give crews a clear picture why and when the go-around will be performed and who will perform the actions in the procedure. This is a key factor for getting confident to take the decision to abandon the approach at any condition that renders the landing unsafe. At the end of the briefing, crews should have a perfect idea of the call-outs, sequence of action, and cross-checks. Some crews take care to do a short briefing during the final approach to recall the key go-around points, and thus enhance its performance. Whether or not there is a short briefing, the importance of being go-around prepared must be emphasized. Why and when a go-around should be performed is dictated by the circumstances, whenever the crew considers that the safety of the landing is or seems to be compromised. The main factors triggering a go-around are meteorological conditions, conduct of the flight, and due to ATC. On the other hand, many accidents have resulted as a consequence of crews failing to decide to go around when the situation required so. Convective weather with degraded visibility, wind, and runway braking action are associated with most of these cases. Pilot professional judgment and airmanship is required to execute a perfect automatic maneuver. During the approach, after the flap is extended one position and the gear is down, the go-around thrust mode is enunciated on the IKS and PFD enunciation. and the FADEC is ready to command go-around thrust as required. Even if the pilot flying or the pilot monitoring has called out or initiated the maneuver, a loud and clear go-around should be heard. According to the SOP, during the final approach, the pilot flying will be hand-flying the aircraft or supervising the autopilot operation and being ready to take manual control while looking outside for acquiring and calling the visual references. The pilot monitoring will be scanning inside and backing up the pilot flying, calling out flight parameters and deviations. At minimums, if no visual reference is established, or visual contact is established at an inadequate position for a safe landing, the pilot flying will call out go-around. The standard go-around is initiated by pressing either the go-around button and moving the thrust levers to the maximum position. At the same time, the pilot flying rotates the aircraft manually or verifies autopilot rotating towards the 10 degrees initial pitch. When the airspeed is greater than VREF, it is time to call out flaps 9. The pilot monitoring retracts the flaps according to the pilot flying call. Crew coordination is required for both pilots to verify that correct flaps are selected. Autopilot is initially engaged, tracking the go-around mode. Check the proper PFD ICAS enunciation modes. Takeoff reserved for thrust. Roll as lateral mode, and go around for vertical guidance. The guidance will transition from the 10 degrees initial pitch to the speed hold mode and will provide a pitch up command based on the autopilot speed logic which is shown. When positive rate is reached, the pilot monitoring, calling out positive rate, will be responded by gear up. Check the gear is retracting and then confirm a few seconds later that the gear is fully up. At 400 feet AGL, the pilot flying will call out select FMS and heading or nav, while the pilot monitoring will select the appropriate navigation primary source as required and select the lateral mode. Check that the appropriate modes have been selected and are shown as captured. At the acceleration height, the pilot flying will call out for the climb sequence. The pilot monitoring will check the speed is at least VFS minus 5 knots, will retract the flaps, will select climb thrust, and will select speed mode on the flight guidance panel. When the flaps are 0, the pilot monitoring will call out flaps 0. Sometimes, when all engines are operating, full go-around thrust is not required. If maximum thrust is applied to a lightweight aircraft, it may result in an excess energy situation and probably speed and altitude burst. The alternative procedure to the standard go-around, which is also suitable for high-altitude procedures, is the discontinued approach. Adjust and/or verify altitude preselector. Select the most appropriate vertical mode, VS or SPD, and adjust thrust accordingly. Select FMS if it is not the navigation source and select heading, nav, to comply with ATC instructions or to follow the missed approach profile. Resume proper airplane configuration, gear, flaps, and speed as desired.
Simply stated, the pilot flying should fly the aircraft, supervising the autopilot vertical and lateral guidance,
and thrust setting,
or manually flying with the flight director guidance. The pilot monitoring should monitor closely the pitch, airspeed, vertical speed,
flight director and autopilot status and changes,
and call out any deviation.
The pilot monitoring should also conduct autopilot and FMS changes as requested by the pilot flying. The pilot monitoring also flies the aircraft mentally, thinking ahead of the aircraft. If he suspects or finds something that could affect the flight, he should notify the pilot flying. Considering the rapid changes in configuration and the various manual inputs to cope with the situation, interactions with the ATC, meteorological conditions, or any other factors affecting the normal procedures, coordinated actions and teamwork can help in making go-around maneuvers result in the intended procedure. After the go-around is initiated, the flight crew must be fully committed in flying the published SOP procedure and the order given. Task allocation and sequence is clear in the standard operating procedures. However, special studies conducted showed that go-around procedures are not carried out in accordance with the SOP. This is especially true during high workload over a relatively short time. Despite of being a normal procedure, a significant number of actions and changes must be performed during a relatively short period. Pilots must be prepared to shift rapidly from the approach procedure to a go-around maneuver. Let's take a moment to review the go-around in the light of some hazards that can occur and how these hazards can be addressed to make a go-around a safer maneuver. Having proper thrust and changing pitch to the go-around attitude, being in nav mode right after climbing to go-around, the go-around should be intuitive, as an instantaneous action. Go-around pitch for a given thrust will determine the longitudinal acceleration and vertical speed. Don't just make these changes, monitor them as well. Check that full amount of go-around thrust is applied and that the 10-degree pitch is initially flown. Manage these flight parameters through the whole maneuver. Applying thrust manually to the maximum detent requires increased awareness. A detent error leaving the levers backwards leads to insufficient go-around thrust. After applying thrust manually, dedicated awareness is required to monitor or maintain airspeed. The go-around buttons must be pressed to receive proper missed approach guidance and FMS sequencing to the missed approach waypoints. During a go-around, if the required pitch is not attained and maintained, the tremendous acceleration created by high thrust developed by both engines and low weight of the aircraft might create a situation known as somatographic illusion. Poor instrument scanning and low visibility go-arounds may cause the pilot to perceive the airplane pitching up when in fact it is pitching down. Pilots may try to counteract this